I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Winston Churchill said the destiny of man is not measured by material computations. When great forces are on the move in the world, we learn we're spirits, not animals. And he said there's something going on in time and space and beyond time and space, which, whether we like it or not, spells duty. You and I have a rendezvous with destiny. We'll preserve for our children this, the last best hope of man on earth, or we'll sentence them to take the last step into 1,000 years of darkness. That you and I have the ability and the dignity and the right to make our own decisions and determine our own destiny.
Two Joes on the Street, your independent political talk show. Hi, my name is Don Wallace, and I am your show host. Coming to you from the crossroads of America in the heartland. Good day, this is Don Wallace, and we're happy to be here today, and thank you for watching. We are doing a Truth is Freedom type broadcast. You'll be able to monitor this not only on itsentertainment.com, but Podcast America and Two Joes on the Street. For a BEA beautiful smile for a new dawn. Be sure to ask your dentist if he uses New Dawn Dental Lab from Mooresville, Indiana. We specialize in metal frame partials, flexible partials, and dentures. If you don't have a New Dawn dental product, you're not getting the maximum smile that you deserve. Ask your dentist today if he uses New Dawn Dental Lab. Visit us on the web at nudawdental.com. Have you ever wanted to have a radio show? Well, that's very costly. But we can show you how you can have a podcast show on the internet. You can have your own site, or you can put your podcast right here on Podcast America. If you already have a podcast site, why not consider a cross-link from here? Check us out. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and we can show you how you can have a site standalone or use this site for your show at a reasonable cost. Give us a chance. Check us out at podcastamerica.us. We're back to tell you that today we have a special guest. Mike Frey, the Libertarian candidate for Congress, will be here with us in a few moments. Mike is running for the 9th District seat in Indiana, which is currently held by Republican Todd Young. Listen closely, because Mike has some interesting comments to make about where America is headed. But before we get into that, I want to briefly talk and mention the incident that is currently happening in Houston, Texas, with Mayor Parker. Parker is a known lesbian. In fact, she brags about it. And because of a civil rights, equal rights ordinance that was passed, she has decided that the ministers need to be attacked. So she subpoenaed sermons from 5 different pastors in Houston. Now she's backed away from it. You cannot limit our speech and our ability to assemble. That's basically in our First Amendment to the Constitution. You're not allowed to do that, Miss Mayor, and she's being chastised for trying to do it. Unfortunately, the government continues to step on our rights and trample our abilities to assemble peaceably, and she was saying that the churches used the pulpit in the wrong manner and that they were diminishing the rights of gay people by assembling in the churches to protest against this new ordinance. You are wrong, Mayor Parker. We have the right to assemble freely, even in the streets, if we choose to do so. That says so in the First Amendment. You know, our government's trying to politically correct the citizens clear into oblivion. And it's time that the people in America step up, stand up, and shout at the top of their lungs they're fed up with it. Racism. What is it? We will do a program on that coming up. I intend to do at least one video type cast weekly. And I need to get back to doing 2 Joe podcast on a daily basis, 5 days a week. I'm going to try to do that. But unfortunately, we in this household have been caught short because my wife was let go of her job and she can't find a replacement job. So we're left to scramble to try to make a living now. And it's all because of the socialist progressive movement in America. And that's not all being run by the Democrats, let's say, but they are the leading force that is destroying our country. So, as you've listened to me in the past, I don't like some of the Republicans. I definitely don't like many of the Libertarians, but I totally am disgusted with Harry Reid, Nancy Pelosi, Maxine Waters, and that's just to name a few of the Democrats that think that me, being retired, should turn over my Social Security check to those that have been less fortunate. That's right. They're taxing my Social Security, 69% of it, and I have no other income, by the way. They're taxing 69% of my Social Security for income tax at the federal level. That's not what the bill that Ronald Reagan signed off was to be. They were only supposed to tax 50%, the half that the employer put in. But you see, most people don't understand that because America's asleep. But these are things that I think people need to be aware of. And the other thing that we continue to battle is the fact that we left Iraq and didn't leave enough behind to help the citizens of Iraq from the evils of Islam and Sharia law. Sharia law is a nation-building part of Islam. It's radical. In fact, I just completed a 3-DVD series on jihad in America, using clips and stuff that have been available through the internet and on television. America, it is time that you learn the truth. The truth is freedom. And America was found on certain principles and values. And we try to bring awareness through the group that I founded called the Refounders. It's time for a change in America. And the time is now. So we go to our guest, Mike Frey, Libertarian candidate for the 9th District in Indiana, running against a fellow by the name of Bailey and Todd Young. Thank you for watching. Good day, Mike, and thank you for coming and becoming part of the Two Joes on the Street program. We're trying to make the truth known in America. And part of our problem is we have so many people that are asleep. Apathy is really bad in this country. And so we try to stun them a little bit and wake them up. And you're running for the 9th District against Todd Young. And according to all the statistics I've read, he votes for the Constitution about 50% of the time. And the rest of the time he votes the way his supporters want him to vote, apparently. And I have a problem with that. And you know, our country's in bad shape. And so my question to you, I know you're wanting a balanced budget, and you want to reduce the debt, and you want to look to a way to change the tax code. And I think it's all great, and I support that effort. But we also have some social issues out here that we need to attend to. And those social issues has to do with our education system. And so is there a way that you think that if Americans would put the right people in office, is there a way you think we could get the federal government out of the school system?
Oh, I don't think there's any question about that. First of all, I want to thank you for allowing me to participate in this format. It is much appreciated because it does allow someone to get out and talk and to engage, and for people to take a view and understand my positions. No doubt about it. The educational system, when you think about it, really wasn't a separate cabinet position until 1979. And if you look at the funding that the federal government gave, they gave to the education department, it was pretty minimal and slightly great deal reduced from what it is now, because in 79 Jimmy Carter established it as a separate cabinet position. And since then, the government expenses as well as the government involvement in the local schools has accelerated. We now spend $166,000 per student. If you would look at 1970 and take the 1970 dollars, equivalent dollars, it was $57,000. So basically the federal government has increased its expenditures in our school system 2.5 times since 1970. They've also extended their control. Bush gave us No Child Left Behind. Now we've got Common Core, which is really just more federal control over our schools. And I think that people realize that basically the test scores and results of our students hasn't increased at all. So we're spending 2.5 times what we were in 1970 with failed results. I come from the private sector. I can tell you I was held accountable. If my company gave me $10 billion to spend on a product, I had to deliver the results. The fact of the matter is the federal government has delivered poor results while increasing spending. I'm convinced we're paying for a bunch of bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. to mandate. And it does disturb me a great deal. Why don't the folks in Mooresville, Indiana, why don't the folks in Martinsville, Indiana, why don't the folks in Greenwood, Indiana run their own schools? Instead, they're being mandated by Washington, D.C., and the fact of the matter is, again, it's failing. And we also, I think there's a different belief in different concepts in different communities about how education is. And I think it's the local, and I think the Constitution says that this really should be a local, at most a state responsibility. It's certainly not a federal government responsibility. It's another case of the overreach of the federal government.
One of the things that I've found out, because we do a constitutional essay for 8th grade students through the Refounders, which I'm the chairman of, in talking with the school districts, what we're finding is they teach to the test, they don't teach to the needs. Okay, there's a big difference there. And it's all because if they don't teach to the test, they lose funding, and also the teachers lose salary. And so what we've done, we've put ourselves in a trick bag, because no one is, quote unquote, allowed to think outside the box. And every school district is different. There's a different characteristic, different makeup, because there's different cultural values interwove into the American dream, if you will. And I think that's part of our problem. We need to go back and assess what the community is and how we teach those people in that individual community. And we're not doing that. We're cookie cutter and everything. Everything in the federal government's a cookie cutter. You fit this in a mold. You try to fit a round peg into a square hole, in my opinion, and that's part of our problem with the education system. That's what they've tried to do. And so, you know, there's some issues there that I think need to be addressed, and it's very, very interesting when you talk to certain politicians about it. Some are interested, some are not interested. But this is the key to the future of America. Is how we teach our children, and that's an issue. The other issue that I wanted to ask you about is, you know, you're a proponent of believing that states have certain rights, and you know, this issue, you can't legislate morality. We know that, but why should we rewrite ancient traditions out of the system? And part of the things that we're seeing with the gay and lesbian movement, they're trying to do that. And I'm not against any of those people. They have a right. But the majority of the people out here don't believe in that lifestyle. And I don't think it's fair that we are to surrender our lifestyle for the aggrandizement of theirs. And the minorities seem to be the one running the ship now, not the people.
Well, I think that's because the fact of the matter is, and it happens in many cases, the fact that the minority is more vocal. This is my first attempt at political office. I've been a private sector guy for 40 years, and one thing that does frustrate me right now about our population is people I don't think pay enough attention or don't seem to be interested now. I blame part of that on the two-party system, the fact that I think the two-party system has broken the system down and people think it doesn't work anymore. You mentioned you don't legislate morals. I think that's true, but there are some things that are left to the states to determine. And again, here's another game where the federal government is involving their views on lifestyle and so on to the states, where states have determined that
they don't want to go for it.
They don't want to go for certain things, and again, it's a federal government overreaching the Constitution. And I think what people need to do is just basically start electing representatives who fundamentally do believe in the Constitution, do believe that a limited federal government out of your pocketbook and also overreaching some of their legislation and overreaching the states needs to be addressed, because the problem is I don't see the federal government shrinking at all.
No,
and I don't think there's a plan. And again, both from an economic and from our personal lives. And the fact is that we are no longer, unfortunately, the majority seem to get ignored. One of the things that really kind of surprised me, I hope I don't get them in trouble, I attended a Tea Party group. I'm not going to mention the city because I don't want to get the school system in trouble, but I was astonished. I attended a meeting at night and we started off with the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag and then a set of prayer before the meeting started. And I said, man, that's kind of refreshing. And I said, can they even actually do this in a school auditorium? And that bothers me too, because I do believe we fundamentally, Christians have rights too.
Right, and this thing with which leads me into the idea of the ISIS or the ISIL, whatever you want to call those groups. and their attack on Israel. And Israel became a state under Harry Truman that was welcomed into the United Nations group. And of course, I have mixed emotions about the United Nations and the one world governance that everybody's trying to push everybody to. And I have problems with a guy by the name of George Soros and Maurice Strong, and that's just a couple of names I'll throw out there that are definitely trying to influence, for very obvious reasons. It's all monetary, what they can grab and control. America was built on independence. It wasn't built on dependency on government. It was all built with the idea that everybody would take care of themselves to the largest degree as possible. But we had to, obviously, as time went on, we put safety nets in for those that couldn't, for whatever reason. We would be humane towards them. It's like the Ebola and some of the other things that we're seeing going on. America is always been the kindest, most loving country in the world. Yes, there's some things that go along with being that, and but the most part right now of what I see happening in our government is we have certain people that have no clue as to what the real working man has to face. And we have overdone the regulations on the EPA and all these grandiose plans. But when you take the wraps off and you get to look, because I've done that for the last several years, all these regulations means money in somebody's pocket. Are all of them good? No. Some of them? Yes. So how do we fix that problem? I think it has to go back to community control on some of this stuff rather than trying to do it from the top down. And the whole intended purpose of the federal government was only interstate commerce, roadways, and those type of issues is what the intended purpose of the federal government was to be, with the uniting of the states. The states were supposed to control most of the stuff. And that way it gave the voice of the people through the state. We don't have that anymore. Now they're wanting to close off township governments and move it to county, and the next they'll close the county off and move it just to statehood.
Yeah. Well, there's
and that's the direction I see this country going, and I don't like it.
There's no question about it. And the thing that's amazing to me is so many philosophers warned us, or so many of the books I read warned us about this. Again, I talk an awful lot about the conscience of a conservative, and I encourage people who have never read it. And it was written in 1964, and I know that was a long time ago, but go back and read Senator Goldwater's Basic Philosophy, and he didn't really warn about this happening, but he talked about in his lifetime, up until then, how the federal government had extended its power, and from then, it's gone triple-fold. If Senator Goldwater were alive today, I think he would be astonished if he got an actual look at it, the size of the federal government and everything the federal government's got involved in. You mentioned it. This country was founded on individual rights, but individual responsibilities. And unfortunately, when they start taking away some of the responsibility you have for your own life and your own decisions, they usually end up taking rights away too. One of the books I like to quote, and I think most of us probably did read it in junior high or high school, is and I always get it mixed up with one of my favorite movies, Animal House, but it was Animal Farm by George Orwell, and I find it very interesting that he made in the book, there's a line in there that said all animals are created equal, but some are more equal than others. And what the federal government has done is set themselves up as an elite ruling body. Government pensions are better than private sector pensions. Government pay now is higher. And I got to thinking, we're sitting here in your kitchen and in your dining room. You look at the table, the government didn't make this table. You look at the chair, the government didn't make the chair. The government didn't make the camera that we're using. They didn't make the clothes we wear. That amazes me. Government really doesn't produce anything. Basically, government shuffles paper. around and passes rules and regulations onto the common
And the
citizen.
government doesn't have the money. It's our money that they have.
It is our money, and I found it very interesting. We got a presidential candidate that they're making a big deal right now that basically misspoke and made the comment companies and corporations don't provide jobs, I think is what they said, to paraphrase it, come like that. And that kind of stops me. Well, who does then?
Well, our own
Who does
president
provide?
made that remark.
Yes,
You didn't
I know,
build
I
this.
remember that, yeah.
You didn't build this. Someone built it for you. Well, excuse me, you used my dollars to build the roadways. So yes, I did build it in a sense, And the mantra of social justice, and like we saw the civil rights issue, if you will, down in Missouri here recently, all that gets perpetuated and blown way out of control because of who we have in government.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And again, I think it's a case where we have established a group of people that really have come to the conclusion that they know better for individuals. They're really, there's an elitism in our society right now. And I think both two parties kind of perpetuate that. I really do. They kind of like it. They've set the system up. And this is going to shock you. I'm actually going to, again, paraphrase because I don't know the exact quote, but Ralph Nader in 1970 warned us. He said, what's going to destroy America is when the two parties merge into one.
And we're there.
I think we are there. I tell people, because obviously we've talked about it, the fiscal responsibility and the deficit is really and the debt is my biggest concern. I tell people I perceive it as we're driving off a cliff. We got a cliff here, financial cliff. We're going to go over it. One of the parties is taking us in a Mercedes with a pretty fast engine, and the other one's going in a moped. But
we're going to go over
they're both going to get us there. The timing may be a little different. One may take it 8 years to get us over top. And the biggest frustration I have is they have no plans to address it. They really, really don't. Neither one of them. They're not going to make the decisions because the decisions are going to be, some of them are going to be tough on some people, and they're going to cost votes.
Right.
And these guys are interested in their political power and being part of the elite
Well,
group.
if you go back to the 30s and you look at the Social Security system and how it was to be, and you look at what their intended purpose when they started it, they called it an insurance policy, a trust fund, and it was never that, okay, and it still is not that. And what they did in the very beginning, instead of having, like you or I would, a separate account for all this money to be accounted for, we put it in the general fund. And we're still, in a sense, doing that because the general fund needs money. They just go over and give an IOU and transfer money around. Now, you and I couldn't run a business that way because if we tried, we would die, okay? And so our federal government's doing that. And my blush with some of the county figures and everything that I looked at one time through the trustee department is very interesting. Why do we rent the schools back to the school system? It's a way to hide money for some other aggrandizement fund that they want to do. And, why can't we have a simple mathematical accounting method? We don't do that. And so it's hard for individuals to really get a grip on any of these budgets. Yeah, they post it, you see all these numbers, but what does the numbers really mean? And why or do they do this in certain areas? Well, what's this for? Nobody can actually go line by line unless they've really studied hours and hours and hours on what is going on and how it all works. And I think that's part of our problem because even the elected officials, they get put in there and they're looking at this budget and they have no idea what the budget really is to represent. Yeah, certain key things you can pick out, but what's all this detail down here?
Oh, no
The
doubt.
devil's always in the detail. As you being in business, and what job you had, you understand that. So, that's part of our problem. And the other part of the problem in America right now is the fact that we are not educating our children with sound mathematical principles through the Common Core, and that's one issue. I had my son out in California tell me that in California they have decided that they're not going to have any spelling tests in school don't need it anymore because you have a dictionary on the computer that'll tell you how to spell. No, you don't. You still have to know the basics in order to know if that's the right word.
I got, we were talking about education. I got a real scary story, and again, believe me, people don't believe this, but I have witnesses eating it out back here on the south side of Indianapolis. Our waitress was a young nursing student, and she actually was going to become a nurse, she said, in a couple of years, and I had no reason to doubt her. And we were talking politics and everything, and I don't know where it came up, but someone asked her if she knew who the first president of the United States was. So this is a young lady that I would guess she was in her early 20s. Is going to become a nurse. Obviously, she made it through high school, probably third or fourth year of college, and she couldn't tell me who the first president of the United States was. And right or wrong, that disturbed me. Now, is that important for a nurse to know? Probably not. She's probably not going to have it paid. But still, there's
still, you
some
need to
basic
know where
things
you came from.
Exactly, and we don't do that anymore. My understanding, and I haven't paid probably enough attention to it, there were, through government intervention, we've rewritten history textbooks and the things we've learned.
And we didn't learn it all either.
No.
Because it's been degrading all these years. And that's what's really interesting. Well, I want to change the subject off of education because I think this is real important. Because you were in industry and I was in banking. Okay? And so even though I was never a banker because of the type of job I had to learn all the departments and how it all functioned. And one of the things that came up, and this was back in the 70s, which is during Carter's administration, they passed the Community Reinvestment Act. Now, I don't know how familiar you are.
I'm not real familiar,
but what happened during that era, they were making claims that the big banks were not putting money back into the communities, the blighted communities. They always like to distinguish the black communities, and the black businessman couldn't get loans and so forth. And so they called them redlining districts, okay? So that was this was to eliminate redlining, okay? Well, we were getting ready to close a branch because it was getting robbed every other day, okay? We couldn't close that branch because that was in a redlining district and we had to service those people. Again, because it was a federally regulated bank, we had to do that or we would not be permitted to get another permit to open another branch bank because that was a process. Not only did you have to get your local permits for the building, but you also had to jump through hoops with the federal government. And then they started doing what they call CSR, customer service relating. And if someone had a problem with the bank, they could file a complaint with the federal government, and that would ding the bank's rating. So if they wanted to open a new bank, they wouldn't let them open a new bank, or potentially. And so we lived through all this stuff, okay, and it kept getting worse, and that's what led to, people will say I'm nuts, but that's what led to the demise and the compromise of what we've seen in the banking industry going forward. Because if you'll recall, during Carter administration, they bankrupted the savings and loan institutions over the mortgages, okay? Well, that led out of that to interest-free loans and all the stuff that we've seen and the demise of our financial group. And then they decided to go cross-state banking, and I think that's been a mistake. I listened this morning on a thing, and I want to get your opinion on it. They were talking about the big banks. And they said, well, that's great. Now, this was on Fox News, okay? And the gal was saying, well, the reason why the big banks is good, it's because if IBM or General Motors comes in for a loan, they'll be able to make the loan. Whereas before, the banks couldn't do it. Yeah. Yes, they could. It just wasn't one bank. Because we did a lot of underwriting of loans right here in Indiana using Chase out of New York to fund part of it.
Sure. Well, that makes, and not only that, it's the same thing with the federal government. I've reached a conclusion that in many cases, big is not better.
Not right.
The bigger an organization, I think that's one of the problems with the federal government. It also was a problem with the company I work for. If an organization got too big, it became harder to manage because you had more components and more things to look at. And that's why sometimes, like in our federal government, you see billions of dollars gets disappeared. But when you got over $5 trillion budget, $1 billion doesn't have the significance it has. So, to your point, no doubt about it, government interference in business has caused a lot of problems. I had the opportunity not too long ago to Birmingham, Alabama, and I met a young gentleman who owned Sonic restaurants, and we were talking at dinner, and I said, "Well, I'm just curious, what's the biggest issue you have right now with the federal government?" And he says, "You wouldn't think in the restaurant business of rules and regulations, but the federal government imposes." He says, "I'm going to open 4 new restaurants next year in the Birmingham area." He said, "I'd probably open 6 or 7. But he said, I have to pay so much for 2 or 3 staff positions," and I forget whether it was 2 or 3, what I call compliance officers, whose job is just to make sure we comply with the federal government on everything. So, when they sit there and say, well, business isn't quite creating, a lot of the reasons business isn't creating the jobs is because government restricts them. You talked about the collapse of the savings and loan industry, and obviously what happened in 2008 affected us all. But the fact of the matter is, when it came to the housing industry, the government played a major part in that collapse. With the Dodd-Frank Act, they did you talked about the redlining at the banks, and I'm doing it in parallel, because basically they forced banks to basically give loans to people that they normally wouldn't give them to because they couldn't qualify, but they wanted to make sure, quote, quote, everyone had the right to buy a house. Well, the fact of the matter is, someone with a bad debt load
is not going to be able to pay.
Not going to be loaded, and that's what happened. If so many of those people walked away, and it caused the housing, to collapse. And when you think about that, that's the number one asset that most American citizens have. That hit everybody.
Well, sure, and it hit below the belt because that's your biggest asset, and now all of a sudden you paid more for it than you can get in return when you sell it, and so there was an adjustment factor here, and that adjustment hit, but the value of the dollar keeps plummeting because we keep printing more money and causing a higher debt load in America. The Sarbanes-Oxley deal, that came out right after the Enron Corporation collapsed, and because of trying to fix it so that the officers of corporations, federal government needs to stay out of that. And part of the problem, one of the issues with private industry in America, and I've talked about on this program before, is the fact that if the people would actually own the shares of stock like it used to be, and go and do their due diligence, here again, it's the American people wanting to put their head in the sand, they can control that corporation at the stockholders meeting.
No doubt about it.
But they're not doing it because guess who's controlling the stockholders meeting? All the big conglomerates that sell you the stock. Okay? Your investment firms. They're the ones that's voting those shares because they're actually the owner of the stock. Because you have a little slip of paper, you owe X number of shares. But you actually don't own them because it's in their name. Now you can make them put it in your name. Now they're not printing stock certificates.
Yeah, well, I knew that.
And I'm going, wait a minute here.
But you can get them if you demand them.
Yeah, if you demand.
Because I have.
Yeah.
For my company.
Yeah, but you understand what I'm saying.
Sure.
All this is doing is perpetuating a problem. We talk about identity theft and theft. If you don't have something to back it up that you can actually, some intrinsic piece in your hand, you have nothing, folks. I hate to tell you this, but try to collect it if the computer dies. How are you going to prove that you own it? Well, I got the statement back there. that don't mean anything. They can say that you sold it at that point, and that statement's of no longer value. If you have that document in your hand that says you own the stock, they have to honor that. It's like the check clearing on the electronic check system. The paper is important to you. Whether you want to believe it or not, that little piece of paper proves you paid the bill. Okay? And you know, I tried to explain this to other people. They're trying to get a cashless, checkless society. Then you might as well have a chip in your finger or something, because you have no control at that point of your wealth.
Oh no! Well, and again, that's again the increasing size of the federal government. Again, I perceive it as it's all about control. And again, I think there's an elite group of individuals that, and basically the two parties are in it together. And I mean, it scares me now. Mm-hmm. Fact of the matter, I'm at a stage in my life where it's probably not going to.
Well, same way with me. Yeah, we're at the hill. We're over the hill. We're going down the downside.
Yeah.
But when you look at my 1-year-old grandson, I get teary-eyed.
No, his world's
upside down before he even knows what he's in.
Exactly.
And you know, and I look at the innocent kids, and they're not being taught. So how are they going to survive?
Well, I'm not so sure that we're going to survive. I mean, I hate to say that and be a pessimist, but we've got to turn things around a little bit. The fact you look at it, there's an elite group of people, and they're doing very well right now. Mm-hmm. In fact, their percentage of the wealth, their percentage of wealth is increasing all the time. Again, we're at quote unquote a recovery. Mm-hmm. The fact of the matter is, during this recovery, the median income of the average middle class American family has gone down 5%. Right. Their net worth has gone down since 2008 about 30%. Because some of that's because of the housing. But the fact of the matter is, the 70% of the folks, or 60%, I don't know what the exact percentage is, that resonates in the middle. They basically have lost their financial.
We're headed towards poverty.
No, we're going to be a nation of haves and
have-nots.
Have-nots.
Right.
And unless we get government out of our pocketbook and government out of our personal life, and basically and get some of these restrictions on businesses out of the way, and allow businesses to prosper to where they start hiring people in meaningful jobs and get the medium income up. We need to get government out of our life, basically.
Well, and you know, looking more locally, even in the state governments, we need to do more diligence, even at that level. It needs to come back. You know, we talk about one of the most powerful people, believe it or not, in the political system is the precinct committee person that's not even paid. And when you tell somebody that, they look at you. Well, when there's an office vacancy, those are the people that vote in their party to fill that vacancy if they're in power. Okay. Now, if you got somebody that doesn't understand what's going on, he or she's going to be snookered into the party movement who they want to put in that position. And so the precinct committee person is a very valuable person. But see, they want to eliminate all this stuff at the bottom, because that's the real voice of the people, is through the township governments. And it rolls to the county, and then on up to the state, and then on up to the federal level. And so if we can get rid of all these people down here at the bottom,
then we have even more power.
Then that gives them more power to do what they want to do, the elitists, if you will. And that's why I keep trying to tell people, they're selling this on the idea, if we get rid of all these township governments, it's going to save us money. No, it's not. Because you still have to replace the functionality of the township government. So those employees are not going to go away.
Well, it's also very interesting. It's going to save us money. When is the last time government ever did anything
that saved us money?
Exactly, it never happened. They just find another way to expand it, or another way to get more control over it.
The Unigov thing in Marion County, that was supposed to save us money. It made sense.
Logically, it always makes sense. Yeah.
But did it make sense? No, because they didn't go far enough. And then when they went back, then what most people don't know, and I've thrown this out before. Let's say, and we'll just use Perry Township for example.
Okay.
Perry Township, you and I both know about Perry Township.
I know about Perry Township.
And we both lived there for a while. So, Perry Township went and bought a nice ladder truck and a snorkel truck and everything down here. Okay, the inner city stuff is deteriorating, and because of what has happened in the revenue stream, they need to replace that fire equipment because of the high-rise buildings. They don't have the money. So let's gobble up all the township fire departments. Well, they didn't get that snorkel truck with state money. They didn't even get it with the local tax money, totally. They went out and did fundraising in the community to get that snorkel truck. And now all of a sudden, they're now part of the Indianapolis Fire Department. And it says, oh, Perry Township, your truck's only 2 years old. We're going to give you this piece of crap and put it down there in your fire department, and we're taking your brand new truck.
Because your people paid for it.
Because your people, and it's paid for, okay? And I'm going, you don't want to allow them to do this. But that's exactly what they did. That's exactly what they did with the police department. We don't need all these sheriffs. They only need to deliver warrants and that type of thing, subpoenas. We don't need and run the jail. That's all they need to do. The IMPD. Why did we even have to change it? Look at the millions of dollars they spent on redoing the cars, and guess what? They went back to the same simple logo badge that they used to have. Yeah. These are things that people need to take and be cognizant of, and they're not. They're not paying attention. And this is why it's important for people to go vote, for people that are going to stand up and be responsible to the citizens.
But I also want people, one of the frustrating things is people need to get themselves educated on the issues, and how do we do that? Because so many people, and I was guilty of it. I was working 50 hours a week and catching airplanes and stuff, and I didn't take a lot of time and pay attention.
Did that.
And so the issue I have though is the two major parties have done one thing real well. The Democrats have convinced their base that everything that's wrong with the country is the Republicans.
And the Republicans
have done very good convincing their base that everything was Democrats' fault. And you know what I reached a conclusion? They're both half right.
Yeah. Well, I kind of think, and I made this remark, and I think I made it to you, the Republican Party to me looks like the 1950 Democrat Party.
Yes.
And so they are coming together. The only thing that I haven't found yet, and by the way, I encourage everybody to go out and look at it. Go look up the Democratic Socialist of America. And you'll find that all the people that are listed in that organization are Democrat Party individuals led by Cornel West, who is a very definite socialist, radical person, okay? And go out there, just do it and take a glance of their membership. But you won't find the current list. You'll find 2010's list. They've deliberately pulled it off so you don't know who's now on it. And then go look at the Black Caucus list. You can go look at the Progressive list. And you're going to find that it's all run by Democrats. And one of the things that, and I'll paraphrase his comment, Norman Mattoon Thomas ran on the Socialist Party ticket. I don't know if you know much about him, but he came out in 1944 and said that under the term liberalism, they will adopt every function of the Socialist Party platform, and that the Democrat Party has adopted that. And it's quite obvious, because that's the direction America is going. So, you want any last comments?
Well, no, but one thing that I do want to mention, because you brought it up earlier, and it's been at the back of my mind, you mentioned George Soros. There's a group called Main Street Republicans, and I'm talking about the two parties merging together. There's a group called Main Street Republicans. And there's 50 Republican congressmen on that in the Main Street Republicans, and we have 2 representatives from Indiana, Republican representatives in there, Susan Brooks and Todd Young. Now, my understanding is they've returned the funds after pressure, but initially, one of the major contributors to the Main Street Republicans was George Soros. And what was George Soros doing? Well, he was betting, he was taking money to both sides, saying, hey, so
he's
he could have
hedging his
influence.
bet.
He's hedging his bet.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that money, and I haven't, researched enough to find out that money was actually returned, but that's been the response that has been given, that money was returned to him. But he basically, if it was returned, it was returned under pressure, and that's what's happened. You've got major money contributors that are pushing this country towards socialism. And the way they're going to do it is they're going to get the two parties and they're going to merge them into one. They really are. Now, during election time, they'll be this way.
Yeah, right.
But when they go to government, they'll be like that.
It'll be mudslinging during
It's very, very scary, and I'm very concerned. And again, I appreciate the time you've given me. And hopefully we can turn this thing around and start making a difference and start electing people that really care about the country, that want to return it to the Constitution, that want to make sure that this country, again, gives every individual an equal opportunity, but doesn't make them a ward of the state. And that's what's happened.
Yeah, we're awarding them for bad behavior.
Yes.
And that has to stop. It really does. Free cell phones, Nike tennis shoes, no responsibility, and I can go on and on and on. And you're very much aware of it. That all has to come to an end. And yes, there's going to be utter chaos when we do that. But, and they said, well, we need to take and get rid of Social Security. We can't get rid of Social Security.
We're not going to be able to.
And you're not going to, it's there
yes.
for the duration. But you can begin to change the next generation that is out here in the workforce right now by allowing them and making it so that they are encouraged to take part of that money and invest it themselves rather than relying on the federal government. Maybe let the employer side of it stay. But the employee, half of the employee side goes away and they can go invest in it. Something like George Bush talked about.
Oh, I know, and he got crucified for it because they demagogued it. But the fact of the matter is the federal government pays 2% return on the money. I can tell you that with the exception of maybe 2 or 3, maybe 4 years of my 40 years when I was contributing my 401k, I did much better than the 2%.
Oh, so did I.
We had some big downturns where I had some initial shocks. I mean, when they're negative, the shocks are there. But the fact that
I was making money during my tenure, I was making money.
No doubt about it, and you were doing it better than the 2%.
Oh yeah, I was getting about 10.5%, 12%.
Exactly. So yeah,
and of course, obviously that all went away. But but the point being is, we as a nation need to understand. Yes, we have to have safety nets. We have to have this for our citizens. We're a very humane society, and we're not barbaric. But I think we're going back to barbarianism. I'm sorry, but I do think that's where we're headed with some of the things that we're doing. And again, Mike, I appreciate your candidness and your effort to run, and I hope that some of the people that watch this will understand that we need a radical change in Washington, D.C., and it needs to start right now, not next election. It has to start soon, or else America will not look the same in the next decade, because
it could be too late.
It could be too late by then. And we have someone controlling the Senate that will not allow the House bills to even be heard, and we have a president that is outside the bounds of writing executive orders. And if we don't take control with some people that have the intestinal fortitude to stand up to these people and say no. See, what people don't understand, when he vetoes it, it can go right back through the system and they get a larger percentage of votes and they can override his veto. And that's what really needs to happen the next 2 years. But I don't think it's going to happen, Mike.
And we also need to make sure the representatives we send up are really what they say they are when they campaign, because you see a lot of limited government individual candidates, I should say, who when they get up there become big government voters. And, and that's the biggest frustration I'm finding, because 30-second TV spots can make someone sound a lot different than what they are.
Well, and in talking candidly with some people, and I won't mention their name, that are in office that went for the intent of what you're saying, and they get up there on Capitol Hill and they get told, well, if you're not going to listen to us, you're not going to be on any committees, and we're going to set you over to count pencils for the next 2 years or 6 years because you're not going to follow us. We're not going to allow you to have any say or vote. Well, see, that's what you're up against. So you have to put more of those people in there so that they go walk in there and they say, you want to make a bet on that? We are taking over. And you're not going to do that to us. Unfortunately, we don't get enough power.
Or else you elect someone totally independent that's not part of that system, and they just they're so loud, I hate to say it, so obnoxious.
No.
That they get media attention, and they force change that way.
Yeah.
The people kind of force the change.
Right.
And I think that's what's going to happen.
Well, I think you're right. And you know, if I guess if you're elected, I don't think I'm going to find you caucusing with the Democrats too much. I think you'll be more towards a Republican side of things, even though we know that we're losing ground even with that party, because conservatism is where we have to go to save this country.
No doubt about it.
And we have to be more conservative, more prudent with what we're doing. And that's where we're at. And that's where I want to leave it. And I want to thank Mike for sitting down with me. And if you got a comment or two, we'll just close it with your comments.
Okay, well, again, thanks again for the opportunity. I want all individuals, all Americans, first of all, get yourself educated. Find out why you're voting for the individual you're voting for. Don't vote for them just because they have an R or D behind their name. And if you happen to view this before the November 4th election, I'm asking you to check my positions out at www.freyforcongress.com. If I make sense, if you really believe in limited government, if you really want to get the federal government out of our economic and our personal lives, then I'm really the candidate in this district to vote for. If I don't make sense, then vote for the individual you've been voting for all along. But if you do that, just remember one thing. Nothing's going to be any different. And 2 years from now, we'll be talking about a $22 trillion deficit or debt and a yearly $1 trillion deficit, and increasing government control in our personal lives. So thank you.
Well, again, thanks, Mike.
Thanks a lot. Hello, I'm Mike Frey, and I'm the Libertarian candidate running for Congress in Indiana's 9th Congressional District. Like most of you, I have watched the two major parties run up a $20 trillion deficit for us, our children, and our grandchildren with no plans to address. Like most of you, I have watched the federal government get involved in areas such as education with no plan to address areas that really the federal government has no right to belong. Like most of you, we have watched the federal government and the two major parties pass legislation that treats employees of the government different than they treat the private sector, with no plans to address. Like most of you, I have watched the two major parties develop a system where incumbents have certain advantages that allow them to win 90% of the elections without ever meeting the voters in a debate format. And again, the two major parties have no plans to address. If you would like to actually see the federal deficit and debt addressed, if you would like to see the 80,000-page tax code addressed and simplified where the average citizen can understand it, if you would like to see a system developed that allows candidates from other parties other than the two major parties have an opportunity to win and really address the country's needs, then I suggest you take a look at Mike Frey for Congress, www.freyforcongress.com, and please, let's make a difference this year and vote for Mike Frey. That wasn't too bad, was it?
Nope.